Hey everybody, it's Disorganized Play. Welcome to... Apparently there's only an instrumental theme song now. There hasn't been a rhyming and scheming version. Maybe I need to do a Beastie Boys inspired version of the Disorganized Play theme. That doesn't seem like something I'll be successful at. Hi, welcome. I'm Tom Lommel. I am your host. I DM a game every Wednesday on Saving Throw. Tuesdays, I put together my thoughts on how I'm going to prepare and what I'm going to put together for that game. Wednesdays, we play it out for you live here on Saving Throw Show. And Thursdays at 2, I come back and talk about what worked, what didn't work, what I would change, what we can learn from what was intended and what actually happened, right? So, welcome one and all to the show. Thank you so much for joining me. If you have questions, you can fire off questions. We're going to sort of walk through last night's session kind of in reverse chronological order. So, take a look at today's topics. We're going to start with labyrinths and minigames. We're going to move on to codes, ciphers, and puzzles, and then finally we're going to talk about book 'em. So, Thursdays, we lament why players decided not to search for anything at all and missed all of my clues. That's very well put, BSB Care. You know, there's something to be said for they walk into the room and they see the one important thing and they latch onto it and they won't let, they then figure, well, they've got everything they need out of that place, right, without even bothering to search. I called them out on that appropriately during the session, so I'm not ashamed of how that worked out. I was a little bit like, well, let's think of some other ways that we could get this information out there, right? So it only adopted one NPC. Very good. Well, I'm glad you all had good games. I hope you had a good time watching the stream, whether you caught it last night. It went late. I will apologize for that. That rests solely on my shoulders, really. And it was a fun time, but that last half an hour was more of a grind than I think it needed to be. So. The players felt it. I'm sure you probably felt it. I certainly had some thoughts afterwards, like, I should have tightened that up. We're going to talk about that. Hey, let's talk about that right now. I've got the window open, so if you're going to hear more background noise than usual, like that helicopter, yeah, where's it going? Where's it coming from? What's its purpose, flying so low over the house? Rarely do any of those things matter to me. That's kind of my life. Yes, it went very late last night. All right, so let's take a look. For those who didn't see pictures, the players had to go into a maze and sort of recharge the keys to this pipe organ by pulling energy out of the maze. That was the ostensible kind of pretext for playing a mini game. So let's dive over. There it is. This is a very old German board game, and you can find variants of it in Target right now. I really recommend this game. I really love the mechanics for it, and I feel like it's got a fantasy theme, but you can literally drop it into your D&D game as a standalone piece of set dressing and as a terrain thing to manipulate and explore, and I think it really holds up and doesn't feel weird or awkward at the table where you go, why are we, what is this, like what's happening now? It's not a big gear shift, right? And I agree, it is a fantastic game. There are a few variations on it. I haven't played all of them, but yeah, I first played this game in Germany when I was there. I lived there as an exchange student after I graduated from high school, and that's where I came to love it. I'm sure you can get cheap copies on eBay too, so this should not be a big expense for you. But let's pop it open and take a look at it. Plonk. Mine still has the original German rules in it. Good times. Good times. All right. So, I don't know how many of you got to see this being set up. Here's the thing. It's not going to quite fit in my on my screen here. So it's got a series. These tiles are fixed, right? They don't move. That's going to be one of the key rookie mistakes, right? Is that you're going to try and push on a row or a column that doesn't move. I'm not going to fill all of them. But here's one of the reasons that I often come back to this particular game when I'm looking for a mini game to drop into my D&D session, because it is just like a terrain tile, but it's terrain tiles that are intentionally meant to be manipulated to shift around and move. And I find, if you just squint a little bit, all of a sudden, like, it really comes into, like, oh, there's the pathways, I see where that goes. And you don't have a lot of choices in terms of where you're going to shift the maze and move the pieces. You can... There's a couple different ways to set it up. You can set it up, like, in a very mean kind of way and not connect anything, like this. Like, this piece doesn't connect to anything right now. But as the board gets played, things get more and more connected eventually, right? So that's the beauty of it. It kind of goes from chaos. It goes from chaos into order, and so I definitely was playing a different style of game with the mini game that I was playing when I was playing versus what the players are playing, right? The players are trying to make connections, and I'm somewhat trying to make connections, but I'm also playing a little bit defensively to keep them from getting to their goals and that sort of things. So, why did I decide to use this? I felt like this was the logical, like the ultimate logical expression of White Plume Mountain, right? White Plume Mountain, it has so many puzzles and riddles and traps in it that what's the logical, like, highest possible extent? In what way could you heighten that premise to the most supreme outcome, to its ultimate logical conclusion, right? Or even kind of fantastical conclusion. And that would be to dump the players in a maze. Now, what I hate mazes in Dungeons & Dragons. I don't think they're a fun play experience at all. The party goes into turtle mode. We're going to check everything for traps. We're going to take a piece and they follow like a completely obvious strategy of, we're going to take our piece of chalk and we're going to start on the right-hand wall and we're just going to keep following it around and following it around and following it around. There's very rarely any sort of pressure. They either get lost and then they hate it because they don't have any way of solving it, or they don't get lost because they go through it absolutely mechanically and it takes forever, right? So I think, even though a maze is a classic fantasy encounter, we enter this maze and there's all kinds of weird and foreboding things, right? Like, that is almost like a core element, like a key trope within Dungeons & Dragons, but I think it's a terrible play experience. What I love about this, if you're playing Theater of the Mind, forget it. If you're making the players map it, forget it. If you're the DM trying to keep track of where they are on the map and then comparing where their thing was, where their map is off versus what you've got in your map, it's just not fun for anyone involved, and it should be fun. Like, a maze should create this feeling of, like, oh, anxiety, are we going to get lost, and tension and suspense, and it does none of those things. It generally is just frustrating, right? So those are my big slams against a maze. I think it's ideally suited for the conclusion of White Plume Mountain, because White Plume Mountain is so iconic that to have that iconic maze experience really pays it off. And this is what I love about Amazing Labyrinth, is you can see the whole maze, you can manipulate the whole maze, and then you're playing against the DM. Oh, he's going to screw me by going this way. Oh, he's doing that move that I didn't want him to do. Oh, he pushed me off the edge, and now I go over here. All of that stuff is fun, right? I can see what's happening. I don't have to worry about getting lost. I do have to worry about getting isolated. I have to worry about getting cornered. But it has that fun, fantastical, whimsical feel of, oh, and then everything shifts. Oh, weird. And now I've got this connected, so I can go from, or whatever. That's not a good example. But it has the feel of a mythological maze. It has the magical whimsy of a shifting maze, which you could never describe as theater of the mind, right? You could describe it, but the players wouldn't even bother trying to keep track of where they were and how they were going to get to their goal. So, to me, to do a maze encounter, this was the way to do it. This really, it was thematically appropriate. It was mechanically intriguing, and it provides a fun play experience that keeps the players largely involved. Like I think one of the reasons that we went late last night is because everybody was starting to kind of like peak out and burn out, but also everybody was like, oh, we're so close, we're just there. Like, oh, everybody was happy to take their turn. So that was some of the juggling act that I had to do last night with that particular aspect of it. But Amy clearly loved this thing. I think all the players were engaged and interested in it, and I think that it paid off appropriately. I wish I had carved out more time for them to kind of play with it in a more whimsical fashion. Really what it comes down to is I wish that I had given those specters fewer hit points so that they could have defeated them and then kind of explored a little bit more. I wish there had been also maybe some traps. I could have put some traps on certain things. I could have made notes. Okay, when they cross, and some of these guys are fixed, right? So like these tiles are fixed, so I could know, okay, when they cross the green gem, this thing's going to happen, right? There's certainly a number of different ways to jazz this up and make it cooler, and excuse me, to make it more of the iconic experience, other than just you're getting chased around the maze. So, in hindsight, I wish I had put more thought into what are 3 ways that this could be cool, rather than one way. The one way it was cool was you're getting chased around by monsters, right? I would add a second thing of like, oh, there's traps, and I would also consider adding a thing where I search for secret doors, and if I get high enough, I find a secret door and I can go through a wall, right? That seems very... Or maybe something where I can manipulate a tile in the middle, like I can... If I'm standing on it, I can twist something and turn it 90 degrees. So those are some interesting ways that you could manipulate and explore this. You could heighten this encounter to be even more of a fantastic and whimsical thing. So yeah, that's overall I thought it was successful. I had prepped more of the session than we got to. I did feel like I let the it's a real difficult balancing act, right, in terms of how long this particular encounter went. Because if the party actually decides to fight those things, then they're fairly quickly defeated. Like, we saw that last night. Like, once they took more than 2 shots at it, those things were done. They had 22 hit points. Like, I didn't juice the hit points or anything like that. And they all pretty much have magical items or artifacts because they're 4th level, right? or even though they're 4th level. So it wasn't as much of a challenge as a standard set of specters. Like if you don't have a magical weapon, then they're tough. I did ease them back a little bit. They should be able to just go through the maze and go right towards you, but that feels like cheating. That feels like the DM's not playing the game along with you. I will point out that they got the benefit of staggering initiative, right? So I gave them the option to either do party initiative or to do one-on-one initiative. And if they'd gone party initiative, then they go, then all the monsters go. And then they go, and then all the monsters go. Instead, it was they go, or one character goes, one monster goes. One character goes, another monster goes. One character goes, a third monster goes. When Garav was trapped in the corner up here, and he got knocked out, there were 2 specters right next to him. One of them hit him, and that's an automatical crit, and that's an automatic 2 failed death saves. If we had been using party initiative, where all the monsters go on the same tick, one of them would have hit him and inflicted 2 failed death saves. The other one probably would have hit him and inflicted 2 death saves, and he would have been toast. He would have been out, completely out. So, that's where staggering your monster's initiative, not having them act as a mob, actually worked to the party's benefit. You can play a little bit more hardball, because then Grayson was able to come over and heal him and save him and whatnot, right? So, so that was another just point about the encounter that I wanted to make sure that everybody kind of clued into. Like, they actually, even though it seems like the DM is cheating by going a bunch more, and maybe I was cheating because I was eliminating dead turns, where if I'd been strict about keeping the initiative ticks, some of those guys wouldn't have moved toward the end. Those 2 guys don't move all the time, although it does make it a little more frenetic. But it also was roadblocking. So maybe that's where the encounter kind of fell down, is toward the end, a player would go, and a monster would go, a player would go, and even though that monster had been killed on that initiative tick, I wouldn't let 2 players go in a row. And that's probably what I should have done in hindsight. So, I highly recommend this game just as a game to play. It's super fun, and it's got kind of like a Carcassonne kind of feel of like, let's lay tiles and move them around, but not so much, it's not tile placement as it is like, let's manipulate this thing. And it's I find it a very relaxing, kind of interesting game. You push around and shove and collect some things and move some things around, and it really exercises your brain in a different way. Love, love, love it as a mini game to drop into a regular D&D session. The other function that this mini game plays, which I just want to point out, is I really looked at like last night's session as like, well, this is the climax of the adventure arc. It's possible like next week might still be there might still be some things that go on, right? But I really tried to design last night's session around, this is the big session, like some cool and interesting things need to happen. This mini game took the place of the big boss fight, right? Well, there's no big boss really left in White Plume Mountain, and instead of having pushing to a big boss fight, now what I could have done is I could have had these spirits like start some hassling and then had the big monster kind of like slowly stalking around, give them a slower speed. Just looking around to see if I have any miniatures big enough to kind of like represent. But, give him a slower speed so he just sort of comes lumbering towards you, but maybe use the minions to kind of herd players in a particular direction, and then he slowly traps you. It's another interesting way that we could have built this encounter. But that was really the main function here, is like, this was our key encounter. It wasn't a big boss fight, it was our big kind of like combination combat puzzle encounter, right? They treated it as far more of a puzzle encounter than they did a combat encounter, although we eventually got there. So, I think that's a great way to vary up your sessions and vary up kind of the payoff of your adventure arcs. Is not everything ends and we confront the bad guy. Sometimes it's we have to do this thing that's difficult and push our resources to the limit. So yeah, it's similar to some of the you see a lot of Monday Night Dungeon Fight in the stuff that I prep myself, right? That's not an accident. As I said on Tuesday, I try to make it my goal to like sit down and think about like, okay, I've played a lot of standard D&D. How can I take some of those standard scenarios and those standard encounters and then ramp them up to 11 and make them really high fantasy, weird, interesting, and different. Maybe not bizarre, but certainly make them feel like we're playing an epic fantasy where things are possible beyond what's explicitly stated in the rulebooks. So I'm thinking, Christian Linky says, I'm thinking of using the gaming paper tiles for the fixed sections and dungeon tiles for the movement. Yeah, that could be interesting too, right? Like I thought about having dungeon tiles around the edges so that there would be fixed areas that you could maybe go into and around. We had a little bit of that. You could do something with using regular dungeon tiles to like manipulate the maze. I think that's going to require a little more prep and a little more thought. It may pay off in a better way. What I love about this is I literally just take it out of the box. I put the tiles in, and within 3 minutes we can start pushing and manipulating and playing the actual game. Whereas I don't really have to explain a lot of like, here's what you're allowed to move and change, and here's what a standard, if you have like a long corridor piece, then people are going to say, oh, well, can I spin that anyway? If I spin it 90 degrees, does it go flat up against here? Does it go flat up against here? How does that work, right? So think about that piece of what your play experience is going to be like, is when you put those things down, like, okay, well, how much am I allowed to move those? Now, a classic trick that I stole from tabletop wargaming is when I have a big fight where I'm not going to have a battle map at all, like sometimes I'll just set up a bunch of terrain and take over an entire like conference room tabletop, then I will give my players a piece of pipe cleaner that has 5 foot, 15 foot, 30 foot increments on it, right? And if you do that, or if you do like 5, 10, 15 or whatever, or 5, 15, 20, anyway, you can figure out how to divide it up. But then they can just use the pipe cleaner to measure, oh, okay, I want to move from here to over to here. Like, can I do that in a single move? And then you just put your pipe cleaner down. Yes. And if they want to move like in a curve or whatever, I can curve each player has their own little pipe cleaner. They can go, oh yeah, I can go around that corner. I can get from here over to here. Yeah, bend it. Yep, got it. So that's something interesting. Like that's a cheap and easy way that you can do flexible, kind of on the fly movement when you don't have a grid available to you. M says hello. I see you sneaking in to the back of class. You better have your hall pass. So that's Amazing Labyrinth. Normally the way the game is played is you draw cards at random and you have to go find that thing. But I liked the fact that I could use the cards as like a tracker of like, okay, these particular items are, you've now recovered these 4 items, these 5 items or whatever. And it also helped the other players know, oh, okay, you've got that one, great. Let's go get this stuff. So, thank you. I hope you get a chance to use it in your own game. So, we're going to move... Oh, you don't need to watch me do this. So the next topic is codes, ciphers, and puzzles. And this was a big element last night. And it's a very, also, again, like, it's iconic to White Plume Mountain, having some sort of logic puzzle, something that you have to solve and figure out. It's iconic to D&D. Obviously, a lot of overlap there, right? I want to talk about, like, I felt like the codes involved in last night's game didn't work. It didn't work for me, and it didn't work for the players. Now, obviously, they got to the place where they solved it, and we got to the place where there was, you know, a decent resolution, right? But I thought it became too much work for me as the DM, and it was only appealing to like 2 or 3 people at the table. And I don't know that it was a great viewing experience either, right? So I just want to talk about how I approached this and what the process was and what my takeaways are from it. Some of it was the players not searching, wanting to get like the easy answer right away, right? That kind of cuts both ways. So these are our cipher wheels that I put together. I don't know how good of a look. I know that Dom tweeted the photo, but I don't know how good it was in terms of... That's really not legible. Alright, well, we'll just kind of deal with it, right? Alright. So, my biggest piece of advice on these types of things, and I know I've said it before, but even having said it before and being aware of it, I still fell into the trap of, I made this too complicated. It's too easy to develop a really difficult cipher. And I would just caution you all to keep it simple, because people don't, there's only a very particular set of players who want to like really work this thing over and keep chiseling at it and keep trying to figure it out and keep trying to get there. Now, you know, I mean, Eric did a really great job, but like this whole section right here, the 3 big pieces of the dungeon, all use the same code. Let me walk you through what the methodology was here that I came up with. So, let's just kind of organize ourselves up. So this is a piece of terrain, like just basically a piece of cardstock from the Game Crafter. It's something you can, I think I bought it, like they had a sale, and I decided, I was like, that's interesting. I don't know what it is I could do with that, but I could do something with that. And I thought about the idea of like having dials in the prison, like some sort of combination lock or something like that, or whatever. These aren't in the Dropbox because these are handmade, right? This isn't in the Dropbox. I could put it in there. The big problem is that this piece of the cipher code is the ciphers don't actually match the code. All these codes just use the same one, and so this is kind of has fake data into it. So unless you were to tell your players like, oh, just ignore this part, like once they start looking for Sir Eldrick, then all of a sudden you're in trouble because Sir Eldrick's entry doesn't match what the cipher is, right? So that's I need to clean this thing up, but I want to walk you through the methodology and how you could potentially make your own on this, right? So I decided, well, I can do something with this. It would be great, and then I could put 2 of them together and kind of come up with this wheel thing, right? So I started looking at doing like a cipher wheel. So here's where it got complicated, because I wanted to have it kind of operate on a couple different levels, right? So one is it's a very simple Caesarean cipher substitution where T is equal to A, or R is equal to Y, or O is equal to K, or whatever it is, right? But by spinning the dial, I can select which version of the cipher I want to use, right? So if I orient it this way, now I can say, oh, okay, so if we go, the way the code reads, and I know this isn't very legible on your screen, so I apologize for that. Let me move my big shadowy drink, you guys. Put that over here. So the way the code reads is northeast equals T. Okay, so we have north, south, east, or west and east and west, right? So northeast equals T. So that's northeast. So I'll put T in that slot. And then that tells me how to orient the compass rose, if you want to call it that, or the dial, right? Then I have B equals BL. So B equals blue. So B equals E, right? Everything else I can ignore. Well, they didn't necessarily like catch on to that piece of it. But so then I sent my cipher substitution to B equals E and go through, and I can now decode this piece of it. Now, what I could have done is just use one cipher for the entire page and not have a different one for each entry, right? So that would have been simpler. Oh, I'm sorry, the pictures of these are in the Dropbox. Yeah, not the actual like files themselves, but the pictures are, yeah. So if you want to look at those pictures, I'm not going to take the time to pull it up. But those are in the Dropbox, yes. All right, so I could have used one cipher for the whole page and just had them find this wheel and have them, you know, kind of diddle around with it. Maybe have a little more obtuse clue about how to orient it. One of the issues with that is I think they just brute force the thing and go, you know, we know Del is in here. Let's look for anything that's 4 letters that looks like it could be Del. That could be Del. That could be Del. That could be Del. Well, now they only have a limited subset to look for. This could be Del, theoretically, right? So of those, there's maybe, what, like 5 different combinations that they then have to brute force and go, does this equal Del? And they can check it against the last name to see if it's Sullypond. Oh, Del Sullypond. So I decided to make each entry its own different cipher, right? And then furthermore, this column has its own set of cipher entries, and this column has its own set of cipher entries too, right? So it's a logical way to handle, like, okay, these are the prisoners and this is the key that opens their cell, right? Or at least this is the index that tells you what the key is to open their cell. In practice, I spent so much time fiddling with my decoder, trying to make sure I wasn't repeating my pattern, and then going through and going in onto the website, copying, pasting the different codes, getting it recoded, making sure I was copying and pasting it back in here, that by the time I got down to this section, once I had done, I wanted to make sure I did these 3, the occupants of the tower. I wanted to make sure that I did at least these first 2 so that they had enough to work with to see that it was all different. But when I got down to here, I was like, I'm just doing one code for all these things. I don't have time. I could have spent a lot of time recoding all these things. So it became a huge time sink for me. Like, not just the time sink of inventing how this cipher wheel worked and, you know, making 4 copies of it and making sure that it was nice enough that the players were like, okay, I can read it and understand it. And actually some decisions like how do I orient the letters really, you know, makes a difference, right? So it became an enormous time sink, And the payoff for it, for me as the DM, is like there's not a lot of juice out of having these being appropriately coded, right? Especially when you do a cipher type of thing, do your players a favor, and when they get enough that it decoded that it matters, and you can tell, okay, you figured out the pattern, hand them at least a partial version of the handout that's decoded, if not the whole thing, right? And so I also had to make copies of this thing where this portion was decoded, and then I think I did one that was like this portion, or maybe this portion, or it might have just been like this side, but not this side, right? So then I had to start thinking of like, well, what are the different slices that I want to take on this thing? So not only was I putting a lot of time into putting this handout together, and it had big chunks of it that didn't have any payoff, and it didn't have any extra juice to it, but also I'm copying this thing and then trying to like copy in the appropriate information where these are decoded, just this piece is decoded, everything else is still uncoded, these pieces are decoded, you know. It became a lot more work than I think what the payoff was. If this was going to be a tournament adventure, then I'd have to put the work into it and go, all right, well, now I'll go through and decode all of these, and then I'll have to go through and make sure that I proof all the things that I got I equals red. I was actually using red and I wasn't using the blue one, right? Like came up last night. So that was where it broke down for me. It was a clever obfuscation of what was going on in the document, but the amount of work that I had to put in to make it all logical and consistent was only somewhat successful, right? Yeah, if you had a digital version, that's great. The problem is each one of these is separately encoded, right? So you maybe have to like figure out a way like where you have hidden cells and you reveal some of them. Like you still have to do the grunt work of encoding each one line by line and then having the decoded version of each one line by line and figuring out, yeah, I could have put the decipher. Yeah, the thing is, here's the thing. The decipher in Excel means I would have to do a formula for each one of these cells that says this is an offset of 5, this is an offset of 3, this is an offset of 21, this is an... You know, I'd have to keep track of that. I don't know. Excel might have been a better tool for this, but I built this thing first. I didn't build Excel first, right? So now I'd have to do the work of making sure that the cipher wheel matched up to whatever my Excel thing was. There's certainly ways to, like, I guarantee you there's ways that I could have done this that would have been less intensive. But yesterday afternoon when I sat down to, like, get my key pieces of my puzzle together, I didn't have any of this. I just knew, like, okay, there's going to be some sort of code, and it's going to be related to the book. And that's all I knew. I didn't know I was going to use these things. I knew they were in my cabinet of cool supplies over here, but I wasn't sure. So it took me a good hour to sit here and figure out, like, all right, well, it'd be cool if there was a wheel. I could punch a hole in there, and then if I put letters around there, I wonder, you know, so I did a little research on cipher wheels and da-da-da-da, and then I had to adapt it for the form factor that I had, right? Like a traditional cipher wheel is round with a smaller ring in the middle, and you dial and line them up. That's all fine too, but, you know, the point is, I knew I wanted to include some sort of cipher logic puzzle for them to figure out. I wanted it to be more straightforward than what they assumed, which is, oh, there's one cipher, we'll just hack on this thing and then figure out what everything is. I wanted it to be a little more complicated. I fell into the trap of making it a lot more complicated and making a lot more work than what I wanted it to be. I'm not unhappy with, you know, they didn't have enough information. They kind of leapt to a conclusion. I kind of had to hit them over the head, like, oh, you decided to go search this room. Well, you happened to find this thing in a drawer or whatever, right? That was a nice reveal. I felt like that was a moment of play that worked because they were like, "Oh yeah, we got this figured out," and then like, "Well, how do we supposed to use this thing? I don't know. Maybe we don't have it figured out." And then they went in the room like, "Oh, okay, all right. Oh, so then it spawned this whole other thought process. Maybe not the most like on camera cinematically engaging thing to watch is a bunch of people go, "Oh." But that's you're probably not streaming your game, right? So that's a factor that I have to deal with. It's not something that you have to consider in this particular design. So yeah, I made it more work than it needed to. It became more work than I anticipated. It was like last night at 5:30. I was like still decoding and re-encoding things, and I'm like, I got other stuff. I got to get together, right? Maybe one day I'll do a little tour of like my various D&D office supply stuff. That's a fine idea when we have a slow week. Yeah, I love this prop. I don't know what I'm going to do with it. If I'll save it. They were easy to make. This stuff is cheap to get. I got some other cool stuff from the Game Crafter. There's plenty of like. Not plenty, but there's several major like board game prototype and component stores that you can go to and just get blank stock. You don't have to upload a design and know what it is and wait for it to get printed, etc., 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 right? Like there's places like Print Play and Game Crafter that you can go and get this sort of stuff and just make these little one-offs, right? I like how tangible this prop is. It's a nice, fun object that you can manipulate. It's fun to turn. It really kind of like opens up your mind. Like, oh, okay, yeah. I wonder. It's an engaging prop, and so in that respect, it's successful. Could it have been simpler? Yes. And was it more work for me than I think I got? Like, I ended up cutting corners on it? Yes. Part of that is I decided to have whatever, like 35 or 40 prisoners in the dungeon, right? I could have skinnied this down and had fewer prisoners. But I wanted it to feel like, okay, it's a dungeon for a big place. They're going to have 40 or 50 people kind of on ice, right? Yeah, I would appreciate it if you all would give me a help sometime, coming up with code and whatnot. I've done some programming in my not so distant past, so I'm not generally afraid of computers, but it was just one of those things where once I got into it, I was afraid to like go down the Excel rabbit hole because I was concerned that if I spent an hour diddling around in Excel and not getting it done, then I would have lost an hour that I could have just been brute forcing on this thing. The other issue is it's difficult for me to like tweet out on Wednesday afternoon at 3, hey, who's got some great Excel skills? I need some help encoding some, I kind of tip my hand to my players because they all follow me on Twitter, right? So that's our cipher puzzle, and I think I've kind of beat the whole topic to death, which is they're fun to make, they can be hard to do, and it can be very easy to make them way too hard to do. I thought this ended up hitting the sweet spot. We got there, even though there was some jankiness in the puzzle itself and some misinterpretation about how to use the wheel. That's fine. I thought we got there, and that brings us to our third topic, because of course these indexes over here don't reference the keys that you actually need to open that particular cell, right? They instead reference a bird, a type of bird. And then if you have this book, you can decipher what's going on with that. So it leads you from this very hands-on thing to, they find this book in the deputy warden's office, and it's got, I paid $6 for this at the used bookstore, it already had writing in it. So there's that. So it was already marked up. But I loved the idea. I almost thought like, oh, maybe what I'll do is on this page I'll just circle different letters and use them as somehow like a key that refers back to the thing or whatever. But what I ended up doing was tying it into the labyrinth. Let's take a look over here at Dell's entry. And I just went through the book and I wrote like the 4 words in the book. Right? And the only trick here was I needed to make sure that I wrote it in enough entries that we covered kind of like what was on the sheet, right? I didn't want it just to be like Dell and Sir Eldrick are the only people who have writing on their pages. And so when you flip through the whole book, you look at these 2 things and you go, oh, well, for some reason this stuff is scrawled on this page. Let's find these 6 items and go. You know, instead you go, well, is that Dell or is that Dell? Or, you know, there's enough, I don't want to call them red herring, but there's enough other entries of people that they're not concerned about. I don't consider those red herrings, but enough lower priority people in the book that you go, oh, okay, well, maybe we better find out which one it is. There's a couple of things I loved about this, right? I did want to put a different cover on it, but I really do like the existing cover, so it was tough for me to recover it. I love the fact that it's in a foreign language, right? So now I don't have to worry about like them actually reading the entries and trying to figure out if there's any meaning in the entries. No. It makes it feel foreign. It gives it that a little bit of an otherworldly quality, or at least an alien quality, where you go, oh, well, this is a thing from the Forgotten Realms. This is a book that's written in a completely different language. And yet the illustrations are all beautiful. That was my number one thing, was like I wanted something that had artistic renderings of the birds and not photographic. You know, there's a few photographs, right? But it's weird. Most of the bird books now are straight up photographs, and they don't have this nice painterly drawn quality to them that I find, you know, I have a fondness for. It's just a nostalgic thing when I think of those old Peterson field guides and whatnot. So I liked the idea that this was a physical incarnation of the book that we had talked about in the game for so long. Oh, you actually find one. Here it is. And it was $6. It was so cheap. I didn't feel bad writing in it. It already had writing in it. I didn't feel bad marking up. It had this neat little bookmark thing that turned out to be kind of like a dual purpose, like it had already been bookmarked for her. And just, it made a great hands-on prop that, regardless of whether you actually want to like use it and play the game in a way that, use it as a prop to play the game, you could just physically like take some pleasure in flipping through it, looking at the beautiful illustrations. Amy got such a kick out of like, oh, I know what that word is, and I know what that word is, and I know what that means. Even though this book is in Dutch and she's learning German, there's some similarities between the two for sure. So I thought it was a great physical prop, and I'm gonna grab one other one that along these lines I want you to think about when you're looking at incorporating these things into your game, right? Like, that's the advice I'm trying to give today is here's why I decided to incorporate this, and here's how I thought it worked or didn't work. I thought that book worked fantastically all the way around. It was a cool thing to have. It had little notes in it. You know, the sneaky thing is I can go back and put more notes in it. There's actually Protocol 66 is implemented in the book. So anybody who's been following me for a long time knows that I also love like Gamma World, post-apocalyptic, super weird kind of, far future, Gonzo far future kind of stuff. Not that far future, the way things are going. But far future stuff. I went to the Goodwill and plucked these off the shelf for maybe a grand total of $3 or whatever. Yeah, Sprocketeer points out that working for a bookbinding company, they used to make spell books and journals, old leather-bound tomes, etc. One of my buddies, the guy who runs Gamehole Con, had all 3 of his D&D core rulebooks rebound. Oh, and like just a nice leather binding like this, but it's black, and it'll say Monster Manual on it or whatever. I'm so jealous of that thing. They're so gorgeous. So I went to the Goodwill and I spent $3 or $4 on these 2 things. And for a post-apocalyptic game, it's great to take a book like this and then go in and scrawl on top of it, and put new names on things and put monsters on the, there's a monster that lives in this lake or whatever it is. Isle Royale, beware of the coalition forces who are stationed there out of Thunder Bay, etc. Like all of that. Take this old school kind of, and I love this book especially. Take this old school format and then use it as a platform to put new campaign information on top of it, right? And especially if you do it as like this is some sort of magic book, right? Let's get a boss going, guys. If you do it as some sort of magic book, you can always go back in and add more information as they play. You don't have to, like, the daunting thing about having a prop like this is, like, it's whatever. I mean, honestly, it's 372 pages of potential canvas here for you to add campaign facts to, etc., like make a Bible out of or whatever. You could also take this and hand it to one of your players and say, you find this, if you want to use it as a campaign diary, go ahead. And like they could write their campaign diary over the top of this back pronunciation index or whatever. There's so many fun and interesting, opportunities for you to show, like, okay, well, you find this book and this is the Big Bad's research where he's got certain countries circled or certain production of rice circled or whatever the weird thing is, right? But there's a great opportunity, especially with these Atlas books, these old Atlas books. Easy to find. There's enough of them out there in circulation that you can get one and use it. And the other idea here is that you could tear a few pages out and just do those pages. You could cut the cover off or cut a big piece of it out. You could burn some of the corners, that sort of stuff. You don't have to use the whole book. You could have a big portion of the book just like ink stained, blurb. Oh yeah, that part of the book got ruined. Too bad. So I love this sort of stuff for like a post-apocalyptic Gamma World style, or Apocalypse World style campaign. It makes a great campaign prop. Similarly, I got 1 volume of the New Book of Knowledge, which was published circa, what year is this one? This one goes up to 1999, and it's just the letter B. But the great thing about these old encyclopedias is they cover one volume covers such a diverse amount of history and information, right? Boom, here's a bird book right here. Like just this miniature section on birds. That goes on for, I don't know, 10, 12 pages. Well, Birds as Pets. It goes on actually pretty long. But then it goes directly into Otto von Bismarck and black holes, right? So if you want to play some sort of game where it's like a conspiracy style game or whatever, this type of book makes an amazing prop. It's got that authentic heft to it. It really like has a great feel. It is a little heavy, But it's got so much potential. It's just rife with potential for you to draw, what if on the inside cover there was just a list of page numbers and maybe an asterisk by some of them or whatever, right? You have so much potential to use this as a prop in your game that I really, like, I don't have a lot of them because they get heavy and they take up a lot of space. But when I see something like this and I go, well, I might be able to use that. Those are the types of ideas that are turning over in my head. It could be a book that they found that it's a discarded diary or discarded sum of player knowledge, or even of the well, hello. Here's how our bodies work. Wow. So yeah, I mean, and then it goes into like Bolivia, right? So it's a diverse set of information. That means, here's one of the reasons I like atlases and I like a book of knowledge. Both maps and an encyclopedia have such a wide breadth of information in them that I can highlight the pieces that apply to my campaign and ignore pieces that don't. It's very easy to go through and cherry pick. I'm going to do a thing that's all about somebody who's fascinated with the Knights Templar and the Masons and all that, and kind of like medieval secret societies and stuff. And then I go through and I go, all right, I'm going to highlight the Bellini family. I might highlight something about biochemistry, but that doesn't seem right. What else can I do? Maybe there's some pictures of birds that I want to call out. Here's a thing in downtown Boston. Perfect. Great. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to mark all of the sites, the Old North Church. Oh, yeah, the Masons used to meet there. Boom, circle that. All that sort of stuff, right? So Sprocketeer points out that a book like this could become a Bible in Gamma World. That's actually how this was used. I ran a Gamma World game on stream, and I believe I gave it to Jordan Pridgeon and said, you're a man of faith. You're here to preserve the teachings of the old ones. And there were two books. He didn't use this one. The one that he used was, who's the guy from Chrysler? Lee Iacocca. There was a book that was like inspirational, one of those inspirational business books, How to Be a Better Leader by Lee Iacocca. And so he followed the church of Lee Iacocca. It was a cipher system game that I did as a post-apocalyptic game. And so he would flip the book open and go, oh, okay, well, the great Lee teaches us, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. So that was super fun. Griffin, thanks for subbing up. You can use your reroll either tonight in the Star Wars game that David Crennan is running, or you can use it tomorrow night for wildcards, or sit on it till Wednesday. So that's one of the reasons that I like these things as props. They do get heavy and storage does become an issue. I've had these sitting around for a couple of years. But look at those as pieces of inspiration. Here's the other part of this, right? I think this is the last thing I want to say about this. All of the artistic work, all of the stuff that is like takes serious artistic chops, has been done for you. It already looks fantastic, right? So I don't have to worry about my art skills. I can just take a marker and put an X and write aliens in bad scrawl next to it. Perfect. This is where the meteor strike was. Whatever. So all of that kind of pressure of like, well, how do I do something that looks good? Well, you mark up something that looks good. You just make it, you bring your own grunge aesthetic to it. And it's going to look terrific. Even if you just took like a black Sharpie and followed one particular highway all the way along and then went, well, that looks a little janky. I want it to look a little jankier. Go back along that same highway. Boom, 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 boom. Terrific. it draws the player's eye against this beautiful backdrop. You now understand. Oh, okay, interesting. Yeah, they must have started some here around Mariana, and they went out past Memphis to Walnut Ridge. And you could have some way stops along here, avoid, go around, all kinds of. You can really provide a lot of hints and clues and inspiration for your players with very little effort by marking up an existing map. Let's not fool ourselves. The world of Greyhawk is just Wisconsin upside down, right? Like, go look at it. Like, Gary Gygax also stole from existing sources, and shamelessly so. And kudos to him for doing it, right? So, be as smart as Gary. that's my advice. So, all right, that covers everything that I wanted to cover. If you have other questions about my design philosophy, what went into last night's session, or anything else about last night's session, we are going to play a follow-up session next week. We're going to kind of like get to like delegates freed. I assume they're going to free Sir Eldrick. You guys unlocked Protocol 66, so that's going to be offered to them. There's a couple of different things that still remain to be played out. But if there's something that you have like a question about, like what was your decision, or how hard was it to make, or why didn't this happen, or whatever, feel free to throw it at me. Look up an old game called Aftermath by FGU. It's a Mad Max post-apocalyptic style. BSB Care wants to know, can you have something bad happen because of the undead flowers that got turned? I feel like there's enough bad stuff in their future. Like that Margash guy got awakened, right? I'm not sure how quickly it's going to come into play, but obviously some sort of demon or creature got loose in the dungeon and killed the deputy warden guy, right? Is that creature still out and about? There's potentially a bunch of areas of the prison that they haven't explored, if they can figure out a way to get into them, right? And there's nothing to say that there's not more areas of the prison on the other side of the shifting maze that they didn't happen to see. So that's something to consider. James B, you bring up a good point. Maybe we should have Jordan Pridgeon sit in as Sir Eldrick and have a fifth character. He's playing on Monday, so I don't know how available he is. He's playing Meepo on Monday. I haven't decided how much of this session is. I feel like we'll talk about this on Tuesday, but I feel like this upcoming session is more of like, let's wind this down, let's tie off, and let's tackle some of the unresolved things that are hanging out there, and not so much like I thought about like, oh, let's make this a session where they have to fight Margash and he steps out of the shadows or something like that. Yeah, like the big nasty that's lurking or something. I don't think this next week is going to be a big combat session. Maybe we'll talk about it more on Tuesday, and that'll help inform like whether Jordan comes along as Sir Eldrick or not. Some of it depends upon whether he's available and how it kind of fits into the dynamic of the rest of the table. But yeah, yeah. I love the Harn stuff. The Harn stuff is beautiful, by the way. I think Griffin of H brought it up, or maybe Sprocketeer. Sprocketeer brought it up. So yeah, I'm not sure where we're going to land with the balance of next week's session. I also feel like it's for this coming week, it's incumbent upon me to make sure that I run a session that's of a reasonable length, because last night it didn't get way too late, but it got late. And 11:30 really should be our cutoff. You know, we start to lose audience as most of the country goes to bed. That's understandable. And I appreciate you all watching the replay and watching the VOD or whatever, and catching up the next morning. But it's also tough, you know. Amy's so busy. We all have different things going on. I woke up this morning and like I was just dragging. You know, by the time I got home, it was about 1 o'clock, and then I had to take care of the dog a little bit. And by the time I got to bed, I kind of laid down for a minute. Next thing I woke up, it was 2 o'clock, and I kind of stumbled into the bedroom. So I get a little worn down when I run those long sessions. So I just want to keep in mind, like, take responsibility for the fact that the session went a little bit longer than it should have, not in a damaging way, but make sure that that doesn't become a regular habit and doesn't potentially build to, oh, well, it's, you know, if we ever play a game until 12:30, I'll be like, oh. And you also see that on Critical Role when it goes super late with those guys. You know, they all start kind of making bad decisions and being less entertaining and being ornery players and that sort of stuff. So, so I want to make sure that what I prep for next week is accessible, digestible, something that they can kind of like take little bites of and okay, deal with and move on and take some next steps and actually like propel the party forward. I don't know. There's also some big reveal things that have the potential to play out. So we'll talk about that stuff on Tuesday, right? Those are just little footnotes that are little afterthoughts that I need to that I'm reminding myself of. Was like, okay, it went late last night. I feel bad about that. What could I have done to change that in the moment, and what could I have done either in my prep for this session or my prep for future sessions to make sure that we get a really good session, but it doesn't drag, right? So, you, Griffin of H, you are a dedicated audience member when you watch all of that stuff on Wednesday. It's great. Speaking of watching stuff, I mean, I appreciate you all acknowledging, you know, the amount of work that goes into the. Yes, I mean, one of the reasons I love running published adventures is I have like the base material is there, and then I just kind of adapt it on the fly. And if it goes off in a direction I don't expect, I can like look and go, oh yeah, all right, well we'll run it like this. Whereas yesterday it was fabricating the whole thing from whole cloth. And that's where it really like, the mental brain, like I wanna, you know, you can really get tunnel vision on. I gotta build this. I gotta make this coater rings. I gotta make these props. I gotta get all this stuff like, and I can detract from the other elements of the session. So that's when I really feel like everything gets cranked up to like 50, and then I'm like, oh, okay, what's gonna happen here? So. That's the thing. I'm not sure I personally am not sure what's going on with Never Tell Me the Odds. But Dom is on it. It's a brand new storyline for Never Tell Me the Odds. Let's take a look at our calendar. So tonight, DJ DM David Crennan is running Fantasy Flight's Star Wars Edge of the Empire game. Never Tell Me the Odds. You can tune in for that. Brand new storyline. Griffin of Falcon Hollow. Great. I like Griffin of H. Griffin of H. We'll try and stick with Griffin. That's fine. So tonight is Star Wars Never Tell Me the Odds with DJ DM David Crennan. I can't remember what his cast is tonight. Tomorrow it's Wild Cards, so tune in for that. That's with DJ DM Jordan Caves Callerman, so tune in for that. Saturday, you're left to your own recognizance, and Sunday we have a brand new Fate show, Tempting Fate. So based on Evil Hat's game engine of the same of the name, Tempting Fate with Amy Dallin, Gina DeVivo, Lisa Pearl, and Heather Wood. That all-star cast is headed up by GMs Rick Budd and Nick Gilman, where the players essentially play kind of a little bit of a heightened version of themselves. So it's sort of like, what if the much more engaging and entertaining version of yourself all of a sudden get dropped into a weird kind of like, almost like Adventure Time kind of worldscape where things can go completely wacky and awry at any moment. So it's their first show. Please give them some love. Please spread the word at the very least, and tune in and check it out, because I think there's some fun potential there. All right. So with that in mind, if you're in the Los Angeles area and have not, and I'm sure most of you have not, checked out the Swords and Sorcery show that I'm doing with the Bearded Men West over at Impro Studio Theater. We're in week 3. We had a nice rehearsal on Monday night, and we got a show Saturday night at 10:30 in Los Feliz. Los Feliz is a fun place to kind of hang out at that time of night on the weekend. It's interesting. I walk around that neighborhood, and I'm like, it's just late enough that all the people who came into the neighborhood to have dinner and go to a movie have left at that point. And from like 9:30 on, it's basically like kind of that youthful, fun, buzzy vibe of let's go to the bar, have a few drinks, talk smart, and try and look good and see what comes of it. So at any rate, we're doing the Swords and Sorcery show, which is basically a Dungeons and Dragons adventure that is improvised on the spot based on your suggestions. We're adding a sort of choose your own adventure element to it, which I think will be interesting and fun. And come check that out if you're in the LA area. We're running through the end of October, so you do have plenty of chances. But I would caution you to come early. Come check it out, and we'll hang out a little bit. It'll be fun. So that's what I'm doing on Saturday night. Other than that, Monday night we've got some fun stuff. We're kind of like a crazy cast of characters who are going to be on Monday night's show. Like I said, Jordan Pridgeon is going to be playing Meepo, and Dom Zook is going to be playing Burgomeister Meisterburger, and a few other things. So we don't have that on the schedule yet, but pencil it in for yourself to watch Monday's stream. That should be fun too. I believe Gaurav is DMing, so that should be a good time. If you have not subscribed up or gotten a sneak peek at Experience Pointers, it's also a GM advice show with Gaurav and Jordan Caves Callerman and Megan Caves Callerman. So check that out. The first episode is out. Other than that, that's it for me. So I hope you all have a great weekend. Really appreciate all of your time and attention, all the donations you guys made last night. I think, we've got some fun stuff going forward. We're not going to be going into Tomb of Annihilation, as I've discussed many, many times over the past few weeks. But everybody, now that it's finally out and everybody's launching their streams, I just wanted to make clear that that's not going to be what's happening. For the foreseeable future, for the next couple of sessions anyhow, probably next 2 or 3 sessions, we're going to probably send the party to Waterdeep. They want to go on an urban adventure. I'm going to have to try and adapt something to figure out what that is. And they've earned that. Like, we've been on such a roll with dungeon crawls that we need to give them the chance to kind of stretch their legs and flex their social muscles a little bit. So, yeah, so Monday is Jordan is playing Jordan Caves Callerman is playing Trumpy. Jordan Pridgeon is playing Meepo. Dom's playing Burgermeister Meisterburger. And Vanna is playing Delilah. Delilah from the I believe the game that she GM'd, the one shot that she GM'd. The hey campers. Hey, all right everybody. So that should be super fun. Yeah, I think we'll have an interesting time on that in the streets of Waterdeep. I've got to figure out, maybe I'll run Assassin's Knot. I haven't even really read that, but it's such a classic. I'm sure I could adapt it somehow. If you have suggestions for an urban adventure, let's talk about it on Tuesday. You guys can put your little thinking caps on and hit me up with some suggestions, because I'm sure we won't get to Waterdeep on Tuesday's session. All right. Well, regardless of what happens here, Tuesday's session coming up in the next several weeks or not, thank you again to everyone who has shared the love, whether it's just the love of spreading the word on social media, or shared the love of your personal dollars that you have worked so hard to earn, or shared the love of your time helping mod and keep the channel clean and whatnot. We do appreciate all of your efforts in all of their various forms. We really benefit from and rely upon your fandom and your passion and your patronage. So thank you so much for being a fan and for being there for us. We're going to try and keep bringing you new things. There's a lot kind of underway here at Saving Throw, and we're just going to try and keep stepping it up another notch. Until then, let's dungeon. Oh man, I'm easily over 6,000. Easily.